March 17th, 1943, 14:20 hours, North Atlantic, 380 miles west of Ireland. Captain Werner Hartmann commanded U-524, a Type 9C submarine hunting Allied convoys in the Atlantic's killing grounds. His boat had been submerged for 3 hours, tracking a convoy by sound while waiting for darkness to surface and attack. British escorts were active above. Hartmann could hear their propellers through the hull, the rhythmic thrum of screws cutting through water as destroyers circled the convoy in protective screen. Hartmann had done this dozens of times. Wait until escorts moved away, surface quickly, attack the convoy's merchant ships, dive before escorts could respond. The pattern was dangerous but predictable. British depth charges were terrifying but survivable if you understood their limitations. They fell from stern of attacking ships, giving submarines precious seconds to evade. They detonated at preset depths, meaning you could dive deeper or rise higher to escape the killing zone. They created massive turbulence that disrupted sonar, giving submarines time to slip away in confusion. The sonar pings above him intensified. An escort had acquired contact and was closing. Hartmann ordered silence throughout the boat. No movement, no unnecessary sounds, just crew holding breath while British destroyer hunted them with hydrophones. The pings grew louder, closer, more frequent. The escort was directly overhead now, maintaining perfect contact despite U-524's evasive maneuvering. Then Hartmann heard something new, a series of quick splashes above the submarine, perhaps 20 or 30 impacts in rapid succession. Not the heavy thud of depth charges rolling off stern racks. Something lighter, faster, more numerous. The impacts formed a pattern directly above U-524's position, rather than trailing behind like depth charges would. Hartmann had perhaps 2 seconds to process this information before the explosions came. Not sequential detonations spreading across the ocean as depth charges exploded at predetermined depths. Simultaneous explosions, multiple projectiles detonating instantly against U-524's pressure hull, each impact focused on the steel plating that was submarine's only protection against crushing ocean pressure. The hull buckled, water burst through seams, control surfaces failed. U-524 was dying, her back broken by explosions that had struck with precision that depth charges could never achieve. As freezing water flooded the compartments and the submarine began its final descent to the ocean floor 3,000 feet below, Hartmann's last coherent thought was simple. This wasn't depth charges. This was something new, something that had killed them before they understood what was happening. U-524 left no survivors. The British escort that had attacked her, HMS Lagan, a River-class frigate, recorded a Hedgehog kill in her log and continued screening the convoy. The engagement had lasted 7 minutes, from initial contact to final explosion. 1 submarine destroyed with single Hedgehog salvo, no follow-up attack required. Escort maintaining sonar contact throughout. It was textbook anti-submarine warfare, using a weapon that terrified U-boat crews precisely because it was so effective. The depth charge problem. The Battle of the Atlantic was being lost in 1942, not because British escorts couldn't find German submarines, but because they couldn't kill submarines they'd found. Depth charges, the standard anti-submarine weapon, were fundamentally limited by design constraints that gave submarines fighting chance to survive. Depth charges dropped from stern of attacking ship while submarine was still ahead. This meant escorts lost sonar contact during the critical moments of attack. You couldn't maintain sonar tracking while steaming over the target at high speed. Submarines exploited this blind spot by changing course the instant they heard attacking ships' propellers overhead. By the time depth charges exploded, submarine had moved away from where escort thought it was. Depth charges detonated at preset depths using hydrostatic fuses. Setting correct depth required estimating submarine's depth based on last sonar reading, but submarines could change depth during the attack. If depth charges were set for 300 feet and submarine dove to 400 feet, the explosions would be ineffective. If charges were set too shallow and submarine was deep, they exploded harmlessly above the target. Even successful depth charge attacks rarely achieved kills on first pass. The explosions created massive turbulence and bubbles that made sonar useless for several minutes. Escorts had to wait for water to clear before locating submarine again, giving survivors time to escape or repair damage. Multiple attack runs were typical, consuming hours and allowing submarines to potentially escape or counterattack. The kill probability was abysmal. Statistical analysis showed that depth charge attacks achieved kills in roughly 5% of engagements. This meant that escorts could locate submarines, conduct textbook attacks, and still fail to destroy targets 95 times out of 100. German submarines learned that depth charges were survivable if crews maintained discipline and executed proper evasive maneuvers. British naval engineers understood these limitations and sought solutions that would increase kill probability while reducing time required for successful attack. The solution that emerged was conceptually simple, but tactically revolutionary. Fire forward instead of dropping aft. Use contact fuses instead of depth fuses. Accept smaller warheads in exchange for precision delivery. The unconventional design. The Hedgehog anti-submarine weapon looked nothing like what naval officers expected from advanced weapons systems. It was essentially a large spigot mortar mounted on the foredeck of escorts, firing 24 small projectiles in a circular pattern ahead of the ship. The projectiles were roughly 30 pounds each, containing approximately 30 pounds of Torpex explosive, a tiny warhead compared to depth charges 300-pound charges. The appearance was deliberately unglamorous. Engineers prioritized function over aesthetics, creating a weapon that resembled improvised mounting for mortar tubes rather than sophisticated naval armament. British sailors called it various names. Most printable was Hedgehog, because the launcher's spiked appearance resembled the animal. German intelligence reports describing the weapon expressed skepticism that such crude-looking equipment could be effective. The key innovation was the contact fuse. Hedgehog projectiles only detonated on direct impact with solid objects, specifically submarine hulls. If projectiles missed and hit the ocean floor, they didn't explode. This created an immediate tactical advantage. If you heard explosions, you knew you'd hit the target. If you heard nothing, you'd missed and could immediately reload and fire again without waiting for water to clear. The forward-firing design solved the blind spot problem that plagued depth charges. Escorts could maintain sonar contact throughout the attack, tracking submarine movements right up to the moment projectiles entered the water. If submarine changed course during attack, sonar operators knew immediately and could adjust fire control for follow-up salvos. The escort never lost contact with the target. The circular firing pattern, 24 projectiles spreading in roughly 100-foot diameter pattern, provided multiple opportunities for direct hits. Submarine trying to evade couldn't predict which projectile might hit where, even if submarine executed perfect evasive maneuver. The pattern's spread meant that several projectiles would likely impact close enough to cause damage even if direct hits didn't occur. The relatively small warheads created some skepticism among naval officers who assumed that bigger explosions were inherently better. but contact detonation against pressure hull was far more destructive than nearby explosion in open water. 30 pounds of explosive detonating directly against steel plating would rupture the hull and flood the submarine immediately. 300 pounds exploding 50 feet away might crack seams or damage equipment, but often left the submarine operational. The first kills. HMS Westcott achieved the first Hedgehog kill in December 1942, destroying an Italian submarine in Mediterranean. The engagement demonstrated the weapon's potential and revealed its psychological impact on submarine crews. The Italian submarine had been executing standard evasive maneuvers when Hedgehog projectiles struck, detonating instantly against the hull. The submarine sank within seconds, leaving no survivors who could report what they'd experienced. British analysis of the engagement noted several significant factors. Westcott had maintained sonar contact throughout the attack. No blind spot period where submarine could escape undetected. The time from initial contact to kill was remarkably short, less than 15 minutes compared to typical depth charge engagements that could last hours. The ammunition expenditure was minimal. Single Hedgehog salvo versus the dozens of depth charges typically required for kills. Word spread through U-boat force slowly as survivors from subsequent attacks reported their experiences. The accounts were consistent and disturbing. British escorts were attacking with new weapon that gave no warning, struck with uncanny precision, and killed instantly when it hit. The weapon didn't sound like depth charges. The splashes were lighter, faster, more numerous. The explosions came immediately, rather than after delay, for charges to sink to preset depth. Korvettenkapitan Hans Schmidt survived a Hedgehog attack in April 1943 when his submarine's hull was only grazed by one projectile, enough to cause minor damage but not catastrophic failure. His report to U-boat headquarters described the attack with notable fear. The British weapon fires ahead of their ship, meaning they never lose sonar contact. The projectiles arrive with minimal warning and detonate only on impact. We survived because we were lucky, not because we evaded effectively. There is no evasion technique for this weapon. If they aim correctly, you die. Previous tactics for surviving depth charges are useless. Schmidt's assessment was accurate. Hedgehog eliminated the evasion window that submarines had exploited against depth charges. There was no time between hearing attacking ship overhead and projectiles striking. There was no opportunity to change depth because contact fuses didn't care how deep the submarine was. There was no hiding in turbulence because Hedgehog created no turbulence if it missed. And if it hit, submarine was dead before any hiding could occur. The German perspective. U-boat crews' assessment of Hedgehog evolved from dismissal to fear as they experienced the weapon in combat. Initial intelligence reports describing the weapon were met with skepticism. A forward-firing spigot mortar seemed like desperation measure from British who were losing the Atlantic battle. But survivors' accounts quickly changed this assessment. Oberleutnant Klaus Weber commanded U-227 during 4 North Atlantic patrols and survived 2 Hedgehog attacks through luck rather than skill. His war diary, recovered after his capture in 1944, provided detailed perspective on submarine crews' psychological state regarding the weapon. Depth charges we understood. The explosions were terrifying but followed predictable patterns. You could hear the charges falling, count seconds until detonation, execute evasive maneuvers that sometimes worked. The British Hedgehog follows no such patterns. You hear sonar contact intensifying, then splash sounds directly overhead, then instant death if they aimed correctly. There is no time for evasion, no technique that improves survival. You either live because they missed or die because they hit. The randomness is more frightening than the weapon itself. Weber's second Hedgehog encounter provided specific details that other submarine commanders corroborated. The British escort maintained perfect sonar contact throughout approach. We executed standard evasive turn and depth change. The Hedgehog salvo arrived seconds after we completed maneuver, suggesting escort tracked our evasion and adjusted aim. 2 projectiles struck glancing blows against hull, causing minor damage, but not penetrating. We survived through luck. Projectiles hit at insufficient angle for detonation. Had they struck more directly, we would have died instantly. The precision of British aim was remarkable and terrifying. German submarine headquarters analyzed Hedgehog encounters and issued tactical guidance that amounted to admission that no effective countermeasures existed. British forward-firing anti-submarine weapon represents significant threat to submarine operations. Weapon fires before submarine passes under escort, eliminating blind spot that allowed evasion against depth charges. Contact fuses ensure that hits are immediately lethal. Recommend avoiding contact with British escorts equipped with this weapon. If contact is unavoidable, attempt to break sonar lock before escort achieves firing solution. Once escort begins attack run, survival probability is minimal. This guidance reflected German recognition that Hedgehog had fundamentally changed submarine warfare's risk calculation. Previously, submarines could engage convoys with reasonable expectation of survival even if escorts detected them. Post-Hedgehog, detection by properly equipped escort was often death sentence. The weapon hadn't just increased kill probability, it had eliminated submarines' tactical advantages that had allowed them to survive depth charge attacks. The numbers that mattered. Statistical analysis of Hedgehog performance provided objective evidence of the weapon's effectiveness that complemented survivors' subjective reports. British Operational Research Section tracked every anti-submarine engagement and documented kill rates, ammunition expenditure, and engagement duration for comparison between weapon systems. The data was stark. Hedgehog attacks achieved kills in approximately 1 engagement out of 4, 25% success rate. Depth charge attacks achieved kills in approximately 1 engagement out of 20, 5% success rate. This 5-fold improvement in lethality meant that escort equipped with Hedgehog was 5 times more dangerous to submarines than identically capable escort using depth charges. Ammunition efficiency was equally impressive. Average Hedgehog kill required approximately 50 projectiles, roughly 2 salvos. Average depth charge kill required approximately 100 depth charges, often representing multiple escorts conducting repeated attacks over extended period. The reduced ammunition requirement meant escorts could sustain anti-submarine operations longer before requiring resupply. Engagement duration dropped dramatically. Hedgehog attacks that achieved kills typically completed within 20 minutes from initial contact to confirmed destruction. Depth charge attacks averaged 90 minutes from contact to kill, with some engagements lasting several hours. The reduced engagement time meant escorts could return to convoy protection duties more quickly, reducing vulnerability of merchant ships they were assigned to protect. Perhaps most significantly, Hedgehog eliminated the uncertainty period that followed depth charge attacks. With depth charges, escorts had to wait for water to clear and then conduct extended sonar searches to determine if submarine had been destroyed or damaged or had escaped. With Hedgehog, immediate feedback was unambiguous. Explosions meant submarine was dead, silence meant missed attack, and immediate follow-up was appropriate. This eliminated wasted time searching for submarines that had been destroyed and prevented submarines that survived from escaping while escorts waited for water conditions to improve. The Atlantic Turning Point. The Battle of the Atlantic's outcome was determined by accumulation of advantages rather than single decisive factor, but Hedgehog represented one of the most significant British advantages introduced during the war's middle years. The weapon's deployment coincided with improvements in radar, sonar, intelligence analysis, and escort numbers to create combined effect that shifted Atlantic battle decisively in Britain's favour. German submarine losses increased dramatically during 1943 as Hedgehog-equipped escorts entered service in significant numbers. Monthly U-boat losses that had averaged perhaps 6 submarines in 1942 jumped to averaging 15 submarines in mid-1943 and 20 submarines by late 1943. While not all losses were attributed to Hedgehog attacks specifically, the weapon contributed substantially to increased lethality of British anti-submarine forces. The psychological impact on U-boat force was measurable through declining morale and increasing reluctance to engage convoys. German submarine crews understood that each patrol represented substantial probability of death, and survival depended increasingly on luck rather than skill. The knowledge that British escorts possessed weapons that killed instantly upon successful attack eroded confidence that had sustained submarine crews through earlier Atlantic battles. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commanding U-boat force, acknowledged in post-war interviews that Hedgehog had contributed significantly to submarine warfare's declining effectiveness. The forward-firing British weapon removed tactical advantages that submarines had exploited against depth charges. Our crews could no longer rely on evasive maneuvers or blind spots to survive. The weapon's precision and lethality forced us to reconsider submarine operations entirely. Combined with improved radar and increased escort numbers, it made convoy attacks increasingly suicidal. The final assessment. Werner Hartmann's U-524 was one of approximately 300 German submarines destroyed during the war, with Hedgehog contributing directly to perhaps 50 of those kills and indirectly to many more through its impact on submarine tactics and morale. The weapon's influence exceeded its direct kill statistics because it changed how submarine warfare was conducted, forcing submarines to avoid detection more desperately, limiting their operational effectiveness and creating psychological stress that degraded crew performance. The weapon's legacy extended beyond World War II. Post-war anti-submarine weapons incorporated Hedgehog's key innovations: forward firing to maintain sonar contact, contact detonation to ensure lethality, pattern firing to provide multiple opportunities for hits. Modern anti-submarine mortars and rocket systems trace their conceptual ancestry to Hedgehog's design principles, proving that the unglamorous British weapon system had identified solutions that remained relevant across decades of technological advancement. For U-boat crews who survived the war, Hedgehog remained their most feared weapon system. Depth charges were terrifying, aircraft were dangerous, mines were deadly, but Hedgehog was simply lethal in ways that other weapons weren't. The combination of precision, immediate lethality, and elimination of evasion opportunities made it the weapon that transformed being detected from survivable danger into probable death sentence. The strange metal launcher on British escort bows didn't look threatening. It looked improvised, crude, almost comical compared to sophisticated weapon systems that navies traditionally valued. But it killed U-boats with efficiency that no other weapon matched, turning the Battle of the Atlantic through accumulation of successful attacks that demonstrated British engineers had solved problems that German submarines couldn't overcome. The weapon that terrified U-boat captains wasn't impressive to watch, wasn't featured in propaganda films, and wasn't celebrated by public who never understood its significance. But it worked reliably, killed efficiently, and contributed substantially to Allied victory through unglamorous competence that characterized British engineering at its finest. In war, effectiveness matters more than appearance, and Hedgehog was devastatingly effective at the only task that mattered: killing submarines before they could kill merchant ships carrying supplies that kept Britain fighting.